everybody. I'm Andy Bozarth, Community Outreach Director for AARP Kansas. Welcome to the Coffee Chat. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Ashley Shaw from KU Medical Center's Alzheimer Disease Center. Did I say that correct?
You did, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Shaw. I appreciate you taking time today to visit with us. I guess what my first question is what is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia?
Sure. So dementia is really, it's an umbrella term that we use to describe changes in memory, thinking, and reasoning. And so there's really many different types of dementia, but the most common is Alzheimer's disease. And so it's progressive, meaning that symptoms start out slowly and then gradually get worse over time.
And does that happen? You say that the dementia is a kind of an umbrella term. Are there other types of dementia?
There are other types. Another common one would be vascular dementia. We see that. Then we have frontal temporal lobe dementia, which is associated with language barriers, but oftentimes you can also see dementia as being mixed. So people oftentimes may have vascular dementia as well as Alzheimer's disease, in itself.
And what are some of the early signs of Alzheimer's?
Sure. So typically the first signs, they really can vary from person to person, but memory problems are typically one of the first signs. So difficulty remembering like events, difficulty concentrating or planning or problem solving more than before, finishing daily activities, and even language problems such as like word finding or reduced vocabulary and speech. But I do want to say this though, typically within the early stage of dementia and early signs, people can still function independently. They're still able to drive, work, and participate in social activities.
That's great to hear. Do we know what causes Alzheimer's?
So it's considered a neurodegenerative disease, meaning that it causes loss of neurons to the brain. Typically that leads to symptoms and characteristics of dementia. And so we don't necessarily completely understand what actually causes this, but we do know two major key players that are often cited in its progression, and those are plaques and tangles. Tangles, essentially they cause cell death and brain shrinkage. And then the plaques, which are called amyloid beta proteins. So they're sticky and they gather outside of the neurons and form these plaque-like substances. And these plaques, they essentially just get in the way of the neurons being able to communicate with each other. And so if the brain signals, can't signal each other, that's when we start seeing, a relay of information in the brain function being dysfunctioned, like memory problems.
Okay. So once somebody's having some memory issues, how do they get diagnosed with Alzheimer's as opposed to just saying there's some dementia issues?
So doctors typically use several methods and tools to help determine whether a person is having memory problems. So we use things like mental status testing to test someone's thinking and memory skills. And doctors use these particular scores from these tests to evaluate the degree in which someone's having memory problems. Another thing that we often use is brain imaging tests. Alzheimer's disease really results from, as I mentioned, progression and loss of brain cells. So this may actually show up on various brain scans that we use.
And what exactly is a brain scan? How do you do a scan?
So there's as I mentioned, various different types. So we typically use an MRI scan, which is a magnetic type of scan. And that will just show, as I kind of mentioned before, the degeneration within the brain to see if it's there or not.
Okay. So once somebody has gone through and they've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, what treatments are available?
So right now there's no cure. So I'm not sure if I had mentioned that for Alzheimer's disease, but there are a lot of approaches that are typically used to help people maintain mental function. manage some of those behavioral symptoms that I had mentioned earlier, and then also to help slow down the symptoms of the disease. And so there's several prescription drugs that are available that are currently approved by the FDA to treat people who have been diagnosed. And so that's typically what we use at this moment for treatment.
Okay, good information. Dr. Shaw, we have a question from our audience today. And that question is, what is early onset dementia?
Early onset? As I had mentioned before, so let me actually back up. There are 3 different stages of Alzheimer's disease. So what I had mentioned earlier with the early stage where you see changes in memory, but they're more so subtle. And then I would say as it progresses, we have the moderate stage, which we call the mental stage. And that's where you see more difficulty expressing thoughts and performing simple tasks. And even completing familiar tasks becomes difficult, such as like making coffee or using the microwave. And then we also see difficulty with maybe not even knowing the day and the time that it is. So typically you see that in the moderate stage, and then late stage dementia. People are typically dependent on others at this point. They're still able to say words and phrases, but communication just in general becomes more difficult. And then also during this stage, you will start seeing more changes within physical abilities. So being able to walk, sit, and eventually like swallow. So typically during this stage, individuals need extensive help with their daily activities.
Wow. Is there anything that somebody can do to help protect themselves from developing Alzheimer's?
Sure. So risk factors, I would say that we typically may be able to influence just by general lifestyle and wellness choices. I would strongly encourage just being physically active. Doing regular physical activity is one of the best ways we can really reduce our risk of Alzheimer's disease. So doing both aerobic, I would recommend around 150 minutes of aerobic physical activities, and then strength training activities twice a week is a great way to reduce our risk. Eating healthy, so consuming fruits and vegetables, eating protein, consuming whole grains, so things like oatmeal and wheat bread, and then also consuming those healthy fats like avocados, olive oil, and limiting our sugar intake. And then also I would say like just challenging our brain is a great way. So learning how to play a new instrument or learning a new language are great ways to actually challenge our brain to reduce our risk.
Wow. So it's a good thing to learn piano when you're 60 years old.
It's never too late.
That's great to hear. Yeah. We do have another question from the audience. And that question is, how can one tell the difference between normal age-related memory loss and the beginnings of dementia or Alzheimer's disease?
I would say the biggest difference is with Alzheimer's disease, you're not going to, with normal aging, you won't have difficulties doing familiar tasks. It may be a little bit slower, but like your everyday routines, you're not going to have difficulty remembering that. I would, I'll just say that. I don't want to go a little too deep into it, but I would say it's okay to slow down as far as like as aging. It is normal for us to take a little bit longer to do familiar things. But if you're having just difficulty remembering familiar things, that's typically when we want to start just looking at reasons why this may be happening. So.
Okay. For those of you just joining us, I'm Andy Bozarth, Community Outreach Director for AARP Kansas, and I'm joined by Dr. Ashley Shaw from the KU Med Center's Alzheimer's Disease Center, and we are discussing Alzheimer's today. And that being said, can you tell me a little bit about what KU Alzheimer's Disease Center is?
Sure. So the KU Alzheimer's Disease Center, it's a research center that was established in 2004 by our current director, Dr. Jeffrey Burns. And it is one of 31 nationally designated Alzheimer's disease centers recognized by the National Institutes of Health. And so as a center, our goal really is to prevent and cure Alzheimer's disease. And a lot of the research that we do at our center focuses on how lifestyle factors, such as physical activity and diet, affect brain health.
That's very interesting. Can you talk a little bit about your research that you do to find that information?
Sure. So my research interests, essentially it encompasses racial ethnic health disparities when we're looking at Alzheimer's disease, dementia prevention through culturally tailored lifestyle interventions. I'm really interested in dietary lifestyle interventions. And then recruitment and retention of older, diverse adults within our trials. And so the current study that I'm working on, it's a brain healthy diet soul food intervention. And really the goal of this study is to develop a healthy diet to test how it impacts cardiovascular risk factors that have been associated with Alzheimer's disease. So things like blood pressure, cholesterol, and body mass index. And also to see how this diet impacts cognition over time.
Wow, very interesting. I'd like to read the results of those studies. If somebody is interested in finding out more, where can they go to learn more?
So we have a platform called My Alliance, and it provides information about brain health, caregiver resources, special events, so like educational events that we have. And also it gives a way to learn more about the studies that we have going on at the Alzheimer's Disease Center. And so if anyone's interested in learning more about any of those topics, I believe on the banner, it should show My Alliance. So you can send an email or call the number listed below to sign up.
Thank you for sharing that information. We do have another question from the audience. And that question is, do women have Alzheimer's disease more often than men? And are their ethnic groups disproportionately impacted?
Women do typically have higher incidence of Alzheimer's disease, but we believe this is because typically women live longer than men, and age is a risk factor in itself. What was the second part of your question?
The second part was, are there ethnic groups disproportionately impacted?
So African Americans are actually 2 to 3 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. And we think this is because of some of those cardiovascular risk factors that I had mentioned that I'm examining in my research. We see a disproportionate impact on the Black community within those. And those are known to be associated with increasing one's risk of developing dementia.
Wow, very interesting. We do have more questions. And was advised that they be higher numbers of vulgar German. Oh, okay. He is saying that he was advised that there is a higher number of vulgar Germans having Alzheimer's. Have you heard that?
I'm not familiar with that. Vulgar Germans? No, I'm not familiar with that. But what I do know is it typically has been disproportionately impacting, as I mentioned, the African American community and Hispanic community as well. They're 2 times as more likely as well to develop dementia.
Wow. Can you talk a little bit more about your clinical trials and exactly what they are and how they help you?
So a clinical trial is essentially, it's a step-by-step process that studies or tests a new procedure, a drug or device. It's also, we look at it in a form of prevention and treatment. So there's many different types of trials. Some clinical trials use healthy people, other trials use people who have certain conditions, and some trials will ask you questions about a treatment actually that you've already had. But clinical trials, essentially, they test new medical devices, let's say, like, for example, a new piece of diabetes or equipment for diabetes. And then also like brain imaging for early detection for Alzheimer's disease. And then other trials can test lifestyle changes, such as, how a diet or getting more exercise affects health. So I encourage clinical trials because it's important part when we think about preventing diseases as well as finding cures for diseases.
Wow. Okay. They're really important then. And people, if capable and able, it's important that they take part in those. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of diversity in your clinical trials and how you're working on including people from all sorts of backgrounds in those trials?
So Diversity in clinical trials, it does matter. When researchers include a wide group of people, diverse people, they can really be more confident that the results from these trials apply to everyone, and that everyone is actually able to benefit from it. Having less diversity within clinical trials can really impact the advancements in health research as a whole. I know currently there's about 13.5% of African Americans in the US, but we only have 5% in clinical trials. And within Hispanic population, it's 18.1 in the US, but we have about around 1% who enroll in clinical trials. And so what KU is doing to really help enhance recruitment and retention in our trials is we offer educational programs. One particular one that I lead is called Aging with Grace. And it's a culturally tailored dementia education curriculum. And we talk about ways that we can reduce our risk of developing dementia. So as I had mentioned earlier with diet, exercise, social activities that we can do. And then my colleague, Dr. Jaime Perales, he presents a program called Envejecimiento Indigno, which is very similar to Aging with Grace, and it's for the Hispanic Latino community.
Wow, those are wonderful opportunities for people to participate in that.
Yeah.
And I know culturally specific activities are really important to people. We have a few questions over here leading to that. Okay. A few questions from the audience again. And that is, do you see that the African American community is more likely to care for family members with Alzheimer's at home than a Caucasian family would?
I'm actually not sure about that. A lot of my work, as I mentioned, is within the prevention realm, but I do know that like within our center, we have as far as resources available for support, we have a program called the Cognitive Care Network, and it's a community-based program that we have at the Alzheimer's Disease Center, which is focused on early detection, provider partnership, and education. And within the program, they do offer support groups for caregivers and families who have family members with dementia. And so it really gives an opportunity for connecting with caregivers, other caregivers who may be going through a similar journey.
That's great to hear. Yeah. At AARP, we're very concerned about caregivers and offer many opportunities to caregivers and lots of information at aarp.org/caregiver.
I would like to also highlight again, if anyone is interested in receiving more resources regarding caregiving, the phone number and the email of My Alliance is also a great way to receive that information and those resources.
That's great. And those are scrolling right at the bottom of the screen for everybody. We do have more questions. We've got a lot of questions today. Is it true that having surgeries or anesthesia, aluminum, and lack of sleep are risk factors?
Sleep, there has been, so let me just actually back up. As far as like the surgeries, anesthesia, and aluminum, there's not a lot of evidence to support that. As far as sleep health, that's actually a relatively new area, and there has been some association between sleep health and developing dementia over time. And if anyone's interested in those resources, I can provide a link which you can look a little bit more, further if you're interested.
Okay. And what other resources does KUADC have available to people with Alzheimer's or to their caregivers?
As I had mentioned with the Cognitive Care Network, that's actually a great way to start. I know, with everything with COVID, we are offering online virtual support groups, and I believe those are weekly. So if they're free. I want to put that out there too. So if anyone's interested in signing up for that, I would strongly encourage doing that.
And is that for a caregiver or for the person with Alzheimer's, or both?
It's for both.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great information. We are coming to the end of our time today. So do you have anything that you would like to tell people or encourage people to do before we sign off today?
I would love to actually share about 2 research opportunities that we have.
Sure.
So the first study is led by my colleague, Samantha Fickeru, who is a nurse practitioner. It's called BioHermes. And the purpose of it is really to identify blood and digital tests that could help predict someone's risk for developing Alzheimer's disease in the future. And so anyone who participates in the study would have an opportunity to learn more about their own risks of developing Alzheimer's disease. And then also our center is focused on learning about how exercise impacts brain health. And so another study that is called Ignite, led by our director, Dr. Jeffrey Burns, specifically evaluates how routine aerobic exercise may reduce one risk of developing Alzheimer's disease.
That's great. And can people find out about that at the locations that are scrolling at the bottom?
Absolutely, yeah. If you want to learn more information about it or to sign up, yes, those are the great resources to do that.
Okay, I have one more question from the audience, and I'm going to not be able to pronounce this. So what are your thoughts on donepezil and Aricept?
So I know, oh goodness, where is this? Can I see, am I able to see the question?
If you go to the comments up at the top and click on comments.
Okay, I see it.
Yes.
Donepezil. Okay, so I know that is a drug typically used for early diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. It can help slow down the symptoms. My particular work focus, as I mentioned, more on the prevention realm, but I know there's a lot of research to positively show that it can help slow those symptoms down during the early phases if diagnosed early for Alzheimer's disease.
Thank you for that. And again, I appreciate you taking time today out of your busy schedule to join us here on the Coffee Chat. And I hope that your research goes well and hopefully that we can end Alzheimer's. Yes. Thank you all for joining me today. And we'll see you again next week, same time, same place.
Thanks for having me.